Have you noticed how we don't really do anything anymore? We don't cook, we Uber Eats. We don't drive, we call a car. We don't even decide what to watch. Netflix autoplay does that for us. Every task, no matter how small, seems to have an app, a shortcut, or a subscription box promising to make it easier. It's like we've outsourced our lives for convenience. And somewhere along the way, we stopped asking what we are giving up in return. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when tasks weren't things to be avoided, but experiences to be lived through. Writing a letter, setting a dinner table, putting on makeup. These weren't just chores. They were small rituals that rooted us in reality, in time, and in ourselves. Now everything we do is designed to be faster, easier, more efficient, and strangely more hollow. In the name of productivity and comfort, we become passive participants in our own lives, scrolling instead of making, ordering instead of cooking, filtering instead of expressing. Our homes are filled with things we didn't pick out. Our days are shaped by decisions we didn't actively make. And our identities? They're increasingly curated by algorithms, aesthetic trends, and whatever happens to go viral this week. This video is a cultural autopsy of that phenomenon. We're going to explore how our obsession with convenience has quietly reshaped the way we think, live, and feel. We'll trace the roots of convenience culture from the post-war promise of the easy life to today's AI-generated shortcuts. We'll look at how the pursuit of effortlessness has specifically impacted femininity, where even beauty, care, and self-expression are now optimized for speed. We'll examine how the effortless aesthetic hides enormous amounts of invisible labor, and why so many of us are starting to feel burned out by a life that's supposed to be easy. And finally, we'll explore the slow living backlash, the return of a ritual, meaning, and intentionality in a culture that desperately wants us to opt out. Because maybe convenience isn't just a lifestyle, maybe it's a trap. And maybe the most radical thing you can do right now is actually do something. Chapter 1. The Cult of Convenience. There was a time when convenience was a luxury, something to aspire to, not expect. In post-World War II America, convenience was marketed as a great liberator. The war had ushered in a new way of domestic technologies and consumer goods, and companies seized the moment. The mid-century home became a showroom for modern efficiency, electric ovens, dishwashers, vacuums with chrome accents, and of course the iconic TV dinner, a full meal frozen and pre-portioned served in its own little tray. It was the beginning of a new way of living, one where labor could be minimized and leisure maximized, all from the comfort of a suburban ranch-style home. Tupperware parties became social rituals. They weren't just about selling plastic containers, they were symbolic. Women were told they could have it all, a clean home, happy children, and time left over to enjoy life. Convenience was sold not just as a way to reduce work, but as a lifestyle upgrade, a step into modernity. No longer would you need to spend hours scrubbing, chopping, or cleaning. You had machines for that now. The efficient housewife was the ideal woman, controlled, composed, and always one step ahead, thanks to her labor-saving gadgets. But here's the quiet irony. This wave of convenience didn't actually free women from labor. It just repackaged it. Instead of valuing slow domestic craftsmanship, society began to reward output, cleanliness, and order. The pressure shifted from doing things well to doing things done quickly, and in the background, a new cultural value was cementing itself: efficiency above all else. Fast forward to today, and the cult of convenience has evolved into something even more extreme and far less tangible. We don't just want faster meals or easy cleaning. We want frictionless lives. We don't even want to think. One-click shopping, same-day delivery, pre-made meal kits, pre-curated style box, grocery subscriptions, AI chatbots, apps that order our coffee before we arrive, playlists that sense our mood. Every inconvenience has been preemptively removed. But here's the twist. What used to be marketed as a helpful tool is now baked into the default mode of modern life. Convenience is no longer the perk, it's the expectation. And anything that isn't fast, easy, or optimized starts to feel like a failure of the system. Or worse, a failure of you. We've internalized this whether we realize it or not. Think about it. How often do you abandon a recipe because it's too many steps? How many tabs do you close in the website if it takes more than 2 seconds to load? How often do you let YouTube autoplay your next video because making a decision feels like work? We're conditioned to crave ease, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. Even the smallest daily acts are now optimized for us by invisible systems. Your phone tracks your steps so you don't have to think about your health. Your grocery app knows your usual order before you do. Spotify curates your vibe. TikTok reads your attention span like a psychic. And while this might feel efficient, it's also deeply passive. We are no longer the authors of our choices. We're just drifting downstream, guided by whatever is easiest. Convenience has become so seductive because it promises us to save time. But what are we doing with all that extra time? Are we creating, connecting, resting? Not really. Most of the time, we're just using that saved time to consume even more content, more products, more noise. The problem isn't that we have less to do. It's that we've lost the value of doing anything for its own sake. Historically, tasks like cooking, cleaning, walking, or writing weren't just obligations. They were grounding. They were rituals that gave structure to the day and connection to the body. Today, those acts have been replaced with convenience-driven alternatives that prioritize speed over substance. But the emotional consequence is subtle. Without action, without effort, without friction, everything starts to feel numb. The cult of convenience also shapes how we define success. A morning routine that takes longer than 10 minutes is seen as inefficient. Taking a slow walk without your phone feels like a waste of time. Choosing to do something manually when there's a digital solution, it's almost embarrassing. We're encouraged to hack, optimize, automate, but rarely to feel, linger, or experience. And yet, those are the very things that make life meaningful. In some ways, it's no longer about saving time. It's about avoiding discomfort, avoiding boredom, avoiding slowness, imperfection, and complexity. And what's most chilling is that convenience is now being woven into our self-worth. If your life looks hard, uncurated, or effortful, it's seen as a failure to optimize. But here's the question we have to ask ourselves. Is convenience still about efficiency, or have we just stopped wanting to feel uncomfortable? Because when we eliminate every inconvenience, we're not just cutting out wasted time. We might also be cutting out the very moments that connect us to our humanity. And it is true, I feel like people are becoming way more impatient too. Everyone wants everything right away. And sometimes if you order from a small business, people get mad if their order doesn't get processed right away. And it's well, there's no robots doing all this. This isn't Amazon. Things take longer. It's just crazy. The impatience and people want things now. Chapter 2, Femininity and the Death of a Ritual. There was once a time when femininity wasn't just something you expressed. It was something you did. It was the careful pressing of a dress, the slow glide of a lipstick applied before an evening out, the handwritten letter folded delicately and sealed with intention. These weren't frivolous acts. They were rituals, quiet moments of self-expression, control, and meaning. Whether it was setting the table with heirloom china or sewing a hem by hand, women once moved through the world with small, daily ceremonies that imbued the mundane with beauty. Historically, femininity was rooted in these domestic and aesthetic rituals. In the 19th and 20th century, many women didn't have the freedom to choose their professions or paths, but they did have ownership over their homes, their appearance, and their emotional texture of their days. Putting effort into one's surroundings or presentation wasn't just vanity, it was an assertion of care, dignity, and self-possession. There was a pride in pressing linens, arranging flowers, baking from scratch, or selecting the right hat. It was in its own way an art form. And yes, this historical ideal was often steeped in patriarchy and classism. But that doesn't mean the rituals themselves were meaningless. In fact, many of them provided a sense of purpose and rhythm in a world where women had little else to control. There was something sacred in the slowness, something meditative in the process. The act of doing, whether it was brushing your hair at night or wrapping a gift with intention, created space for reflection, expression, and embodiment. Fast forward to now, and femininity has been stripped of its ritual and repackaged as productivity. Instead of brushing your hair in silence, we slap on dry shampoo while half watching TikTok. Instead of thoughtfully curating a wardrobe over years, we unbox fast fashion hauls filled with items we only wear twice. Instead of journaling, we self-reflect in the form of Instagram captions. Even the act of getting ready has become a performance, done not for the self, but for the front-facing camera. What was once private and sensory has now been optimized for speed and surveillance. Feminine rituals, things like skincare, fashion, and even cleaning are no longer acts of personal intention. They're content. They're streamlined routines meant to be monetized, aestheticized, and consumed. The get ready with me culture is a perfect example. The soft sensory experience of putting on makeup or choosing an outfit is now broken down into steps, angles, and lengths. The result, we're doing femininity not for the joy of it, but for its algorithmic performance. Compare this to the slow, deliberate beauty of old films. In Breakfast at Tiffany's, Audrey Hepburn takes her time dressing for the day, each moment deliberate and expressive. In Mildred Pierce, Joan Crawford's wardrobe isn't just clothing, it's armor coated in elegance and intention. These scenes weren't just about aesthetics, they were about ritual. They were a sense that beauty was a kind of quiet rebellion, a way of asserting identity in a world that tried to define you. Now beauty is fast, easy, and ironically, more demanding than ever. You're expected to look effortless all the time. The clean girl look, for instance, seems simple. Dewy skin, slick back hair, minimalist makeup, but achieving it requires a strict routine of skincare treatments and invisible effort. We're living in a culture where appearing like you didn't try has replaced the act of actually enjoying the process. Even our fashion reflects this shift. Capsule wardrobes are sold as the minimalist dream, just a few neutral staples and you're good to go. But what we've lost in the process is personal style, the thrill of experimenting, the slow joy of finding a vintage piece and giving it a second life. Now everything has to be efficient, versatile, and photogenic. The closet is no longer a space of creativity, it's a place to optimize. What we're seeing isn't just the death of femininity, because femininity will always evolve, but the death of ritual, the erosion of slow, intentional acts that once helped women feel grounded in their bodies and in their spaces. Everything now is task-oriented. We do things to check them off, to keep up, to post, to share, not to feel. And this has emotional consequences. When you strip away ritual, you also strip away reflection. The act of slowly doing your makeup was once a quiet moment to connect with yourself, to consider how you wanted to present to the world. Now it's a race against time, an aesthetic to imitate, a routine to replicate. It's no wonder so many women feel disconnected from their bodies, from their appearance, even as we spend more time than ever looking in the mirror or into our phones. Femininity used to be a craft, a personal, intimate choreography, gestures and symbols. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always empowering, but it meant something, and now it feels like we've lost the meaning in our rush to make everything faster, easier, and more productive. And here's the question. When did beauty stop being sacred and start being scheduled? Was it when we started timing our skincare, when we filmed our morning routines for strangers, or when we began buying effortless looks in pre-packaged boxes shipped to our doors? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. Convenience didn't just save us time. It stole something from our experience of being in our lives. But maybe it's not too late to take it back. Chapter 3. The effortless aesthetic and invisible labor. We live in a culture that is obsessed with looking like we're not trying. The effortless aesthetic has become the gold standard of modern femininity. From the viral that girl morning routine to the minimalist chic of the clean girl, the disheveled confidence of the mob wife, and the breezy elegance of the French girl. We're constantly sold the fantasy of women who just wake up like this. But behind every "I just threw this on" moment is a carefully constructed illusion, one that requires immense invisible effort. Let's start with that girl. She drinks green juice, does yoga at 6 a.m., journals by candlelight, and applies skincare with gentle affirmations whispered in a rose quartz mirror. She reads self-help books and photographs her smoothie bowls in natural lighting. But this aesthetic, while seemingly grounded in health and productivity, is still about performance. It's not just about being organized or clean or intentional. It's about looking like you're naturally those things without ever letting the mask slip. Then there's the clean girl aesthetic. Slick back bun, dewy skin, gold hoops, and beige everything. The vibe is I'm low maintenance, but somehow always flawless. And yet, that glowing skin is usually the result of a multi-step skincare routine. LED face masks, monthly facials, and expensive serums. The simple wardrobe is often sourced from brands marketing $300 basics. Nothing about it is actually clean, simple, or effortless. It's just carefully curated to appear that way. The French girl aesthetic is a perennial favorite, romanticizes nonchalance. She wears an oversized button-down, drinks espresso in bed, and somehow always looks sensual yet unbothered. But again, this look, rooted in centuries-old ideals of feminine mystique, is a stylized export, not a lifestyle. It's aspirational minimalism built on deep cultural labor. The right haircut, the right lipstick, the right amount of not caring. Even the mob wife trend, which on the surface celebrates loud glamour and maximalism, comes with its own invisible price. Big hair, full face of makeup, designer heels, power coat. It looks spontaneous and fierce, but underneath is a full arsenal of maintenance, extensions, nails, lashes, tan, Botox, filler, luxury branding, and a deep understanding of how to perform femininity in a way that reads as both aspirational and intimidating. This isn't new. The idea of looking effortless has always been coded. In the 18th century, French aristocrats spent hours crafting the illusion of natural beauty. Marie Antoinette's signature look, powdered wigs, rosy cheeks, soft fabrics, was engineered down to the last detail. Her stylist would recreate peasant-inspired dresses in silk and satin, designed to suggest purity and ease while maintaining royal luxury. Her fox rustic portraits and flower crowns and linen smocks calculated images of humility, a pastoral fantasy only the ultra-rich could afford to emulate. This tradition carried into the Victorian era, where corsets and tight lacing created an illusion of delicate, effortless femininity, while literally restricting women's bodies. In the 1950s, housewives wore pearls and lipstick to vacuum, because appearance was everything. In each case, effortlessness was not about ease. It was about hiding the labor behind the mask. The less you looked like you tried, the more powerful you appeared. And importantly, the more class you signaled. Because ease as an aesthetic is expensive. It's only accessible to those with the resources to outsource the mess. Behind every influencer with a clean kitchen is a housekeeper, a content team, or hours of unpaid domestic labor. Behind every Instagrammable outfit is the worker who stitched it under fluorescent lights in a factory thousands of miles away. Even convenience, the thing we're told levels the playing field, is built on invisible labor that someone else performs so that we don't have to. We love food delivery, but we rarely think about the underpaid drivers. We want same-day fashion, but we ignore the garment workers. We use AI to write emails, generate content, or even journal, forgetting the human cost of data harvesting and digital ghostwriting. Even emotional labor is being outsourced. AI therapists to process our feelings, digital planners to organize our chaos, curated wellness apps to soothe our minds in 10-minute increments. And through all of this, a strange emptiness starts to settle in. If everything looks easy, if beauty, expression, even success all appear to happen without friction, then what actually feels meaningful? When we remove the effort, do we also remove the reward? Or the connection to ourselves? This question becomes even more urgent when we consider how deeply this aesthetic has shaped our identities. Women in particular are taught to master the art of invisible labor, not just in domestic spaces, but in how we present, communicate, and exist. We're expected to look perfect without appearing vain, to care deeply without seeming needing, to work hard without showing that it took anything out of us. The effortless aesthetic is not just a beauty trend, it's a cultural pressure that tells us, try, but don't look like you tried. Care, but never too much. Be exceptional, but act like it's natural. And in the impossible balancing act, we begin to lose something real. We lose the joy of effort, the connection that comes from choosing to do something the long way, the pride in a task done slowly, lovingly, and perfectly. So let's ask the question, if everything looks easy, does anything feel meaningful anymore? Because effort isn't just about work, it's about intention. And maybe, just maybe, the things that are worth doing aren't supposed to be effortless at all. I mean, it's true. If something's easy, then everyone does it. And obviously, you have to fail a lot at something to be rewarded. And I think a lot of people just don't want to go through the obstacles of failing and give up. Chapter 4, Convenience and the Death of Originality. We're living in the age of the algorithm, where taste is less a reflection of who you are and more a mirror of what you've been shown. We no longer discover we're fed. TikTok filters your preferences before you even understand them. Spotify curates your emotions before you can feel them. Pinterest plans your dream home before you've dreamed of it. And AI is now writing your emails, brainstorming your captions, and even generating entire mood boards and resumes. We've entered an era where individuality is simulated, not cultivated, and convenience is the new curated culture. This shift has created a new kind of creative paralysis. We don't explore, we scroll. We don't build, we save. We rely on templates, presets, pre-selected styles, and aesthetic categories that promise to express us, while in reality they flatten us. What was once self-expression is now self-optimized. Even personality is something to streamline, market, and render palatable. It's not just laziness, it's passivity, a culture of quiet surrender to whatever the algorithm decides is trending. Our playlists play for us, our feeds decide our fashion, and our screens structure our thoughts. Discovery, once a meaningful act of identity formation, has become frictionless and forgettable. We're consuming so much that we forget what it means to actually choose. And this mental outsourcing has affected how we relate to creativity itself. Hobbies used to be a way to connect with yourself and the world. Quilting, scrapbooking, journaling, songwriting. These weren't just tasks, they were little acts of authorship. They belonged to you. Even something as simple as cooking a meal or decorating a bedroom was once a form of storytelling. Today, the same activities are often treated like content opportunities. Aesthetic choices must now fit within a vibe. Scandi minimalism, coastal grandmother, dark academia. Every creative act is filtered through the question, will this look good online? And the commercialization of creativity runs deep. DIY culture, once a symbol of indie identity and counterculture, is now its own sanitized industry. Craft kits ship pre-selected materials in carefully branded boxes. Art supplies are curated for you. Creative time is something you subscribe to. And the irony is, the more we try to make creativity convenient, the less creative it becomes. The thrill of trial and error, of getting your hands messy, of not knowing how it will turn out, that's what made it special. Now we're just following instructions, like consumers cosplaying as creators. And historically, creativity was more than an outlet. It was survival. For working class women, especially, artistic expression was woven into daily life. Quilting wasn't just practical, it was a visual storytelling passed down through generations. Recipes weren't just instructions, they were memory. Letter writing wasn't just communication, it was an labored emotional art. Even hair braiding, embroidery, and flower arranging held meaning far deeper than the surface level beauty. These acts gave shape to identity in ways that were deeply human and deeply individual. In contrast, today's digital landscape rewards sameness. We all participate in the same trends, use the same filters, wear the same outfits styled 100 different ways, but source from the same few fast fashion sites. On TikTok, entire aesthetics rise and fall in weeks. One moment we're all in our vanilla girl era, the next it's mauve wife winter, and then suddenly we're supposed to look like we've stepped out of a Chungking Express. It's fast, it's curated, and it's empty. These aesthetics aren't rooted in culture or personal resonance. They're plug and play identities designed for mass participation. Now compare that to the digital creative spaces of the early 2000s. Tumblr personal blogs, MySpace layouts, handmade designs. These weren't polished, but they were personal. Your blog was yours, not just another clone of an influencer's template. Aesthetic choices were weirder, more specific, more chaotic. It wasn't about going viral, it was about feeling seen. Even Instagram's early days were filled with grainy filters and over-sharpened images, not the hyper-curated feeds we see today. It was messy, but it was real. You had to think about how you wanted to present, not just what would perform best. The difference between now and then isn't just about platforms, it's about purpose. Today, creative expression is often a means to an end. Visibility, virality, marketability. Your art needs a niche, your hobby needs a following. Even vulnerability has to be aestheticized, filtered, and made relatable. It's no longer enough to feel something, you have to package it in a way that performs well online. And when everything's content, nothing really hits, nothing lingers, it just scrolls past. The result? A crisis of creative identity. We feel drained, uninspired, disconnected, not because we lack ideas, but because we no longer know how to trust them. When originality is seen as risky and inefficiency as a flaw, there's just no room for exploration, just optimization. We're encouraged to do what works, not what matters. And that's the paradox of convenience. It promises freedom, but often delivers sameness. It makes things easier, but also less alive. When everything is curated for us, our taste, our style, our words, our thoughts, what's left to say that hasn't already been said? What's left to create that hasn't already been copied? So here's the question we need to ask ourselves. Is convenience making us creatively lazy? or just too tired to care. Because maybe it's not laziness at all. Maybe we've just been trained out of curiosity. Maybe we've been so overexposed to content that we've forgotten how it feels to make something meaningful without a goal, without a strategy, without needing to be seen. Just made it for the joy, for the mess, for the risk. But that's where originality lives. Not in perfection or polish, but in unpredictable. And if we want to reclaim our creativity, we may have to do the inconvenient thing and start making again. Chapter 5. Escapism, Slowness, and the Desire for Meaning. If the past few chapters have felt a little heavy, that's because they are. We've built a world that's fast, frictionless, and always on. But somewhere deep down, many of us are beginning to feel the cost, and the cracks in the hyper-convenient, hyper-curated reality are starting to show. Enter the backlash. In response to the cult of efficiency and the rise of digital burnout, a quiet but growing counterculture has emerged, one rooted in softness, slowness, and escape. You've probably seen it, the slow living aesthetic, all warm light and linen aprons, home-baked bread and handwritten notes, or the offline girl reading a book in the park with no phone in sight, or modern homesteaders trading concrete jungles for chicken and compost bins. There's been a cultural pivot, subtle but persistent, towards nostalgia, towards rituals that are intentionally analog, inconvenient, and beautifully unnecessary. We're romanticizing the past in increasingly elaborate ways. People are buying vintage typewriters not because they're practical, but because they require attention. Letter writing is making a comeback, not as a necessity, but as an act of devotion. Cookbooks are no longer just about food. They're artifacts, tangible and textured. A rebellion against scrolling through Pinterest or shouting, "Hey Google, how do I make banana bread?" This is more than just an aesthetic trend. It's a psychological recalibration. When every part of modern life feels like it's been outsourced or automated, people begin to crave the real, the slow, the felt. Even something as small as grinding coffee beans by hand can feel like reclaiming a part of yourself that's been asleep under the weight of convenience. And while it may look like a new movement, it's actually part of the much older pattern. In the 19th century, Victorian upper-class women were deeply entrenched in what was called the cult of domestic leisure. Their days were filled with embroidery, letter writing, piano playing, and the management of household aesthetic details. This wasn't about survival, it was about meaning. These rituals served as a kind of emotional scaffolding in a time when women had very little autonomy. Through domestic routine, they would carve out space for beauty, for control, and for emotional agency, even within a deeply repressive society. This desire for slow, private, intentional rituals often reemerges during periods of great social or technological upheaval. During the post-industrial revolution, when cities became louder and life became faster, there was a romantic revival of the simple life. Artists, writers, and women in particular retreated to the countryside aesthetics and rustic ideals, creating entire subcultures around craft, nature, and quietude. And now in our post-digital late capitalist world, we're seeing it again. The modern woman is expected to do everything: succeed professionally, maintain relationships, take care of her body, her mental health, her home, all while looking beautiful and unbothered. In this climate, slow living doesn't just feel aesthetic, it feels radical. Baking a loaf of bread from scratch isn't just a domestic act, it's a refusal to be rushed. Lighting a candle and journaling by hand isn't just cozy, it's a declaration. I will make time for myself, even if the world doesn't. But here's where it gets complicated. The slow life is becoming commodified too. Now slowness itself is a luxury brand. Think $80 linen robes, $60 candles that smell like vintage bookshop, and hand-carved butter knives you saw on an influencer's cottage core starter pack. What began as a reaction against hyper-productivity has been in many ways folded right back into the machine. We're now performing slowness for the same algorithms we once tried to escape. Still, the yearning is real. Even if the aesthetic is co-opted, the desire at its core is honest. We're not just craving convenience, we're craving connection. Connection to our bodies, our environments, our histories, and most importantly to ourselves. We're hungry for rituals that require something from us, not money, not likes, not efficiency, but presence. A slow meal, a long bath, a letter written by hand. These aren't just tasks. They're reminders you are alive and your life is unfolding in real time. This is why the conversation isn't really about productivity versus laziness or analog versus digital. It's about meaning. It's about finding spaces in our day that feel untouched by algorithms, unscalable, unmonetizable, moments that aren't designed to be efficient or aesthetic, but simply yours. And maybe that's what we've been missing all along. Not just beauty, but belonging. Not just ease, but intention. Because here's the paradox. We've designed our lives to be as convenient as possible. Food delivered, opinions outsourced, entertainment pre-selected. But in doing so, we've also designed our lives to be passively experienced. If everything is done for us, at what point do we stop participating in our own existence? So ask yourself this: are we truly free if everything is done for us? Or have we simply traded friction for numbness, ritual for routine, and connection for control? Maybe the answer isn't to abandon convenience entirely, but to build small sanctuaries of slowness within it. A handwritten note, a meal cooked without a timer, a morning without your phone, not for the aesthetic, but for its aliveness. Because in a world that moves faster than we can feel, slowing down might just be the most meaningful thing we have left. We built a world where we barely have to lift a finger, where almost everything can be ordered, optimized, and outsourced or scheduled. And on the surface, it seems like a dream. No more errands, no more waiting, no more effort. But underneath that ease, something quieter is unraveling. We've stopped doing things for ourselves, and we're beginning to feel the consequences. We don't cook, we reheat. We don't decide, we scroll until something is chosen for us. In trading effort for convenience, we've also traded meaning for efficiency, depth for speed, and expression for aesthetic conformity. Convenience promises freedom, but in many ways is made us passive. Outsourcing not just our time and labor, but our sense of presence, our connection to ritual, and the intimacy of being in our lives. Beauty is no longer something we create, it's something we click on. Originality is no longer a process, it's a preset template. Even self-care has become a checklist. But maybe the solution isn't to reject convenience altogether. Maybe the real rebellion is to choose to do one small thing with care, even when we don't have to. Maybe slowness is not inefficiency, it's intimacy. It's a way of saying, I'm here, I'm paying attention, this matters. So what happens when we stop chasing the shortcut and start leaning into the process? When we write the letter instead of sending the text, cook the meal instead of microwaving it, pick the outfit instead of relying on a haul. Not to prove anything, not for an aesthetic, but simply because it feels good to be present with ourselves again. We can't unplug from everything. The world will still move fast. The algorithm will still offer its endless scroll. But we can choose quietly, deliberately, not to let convenience strip life of its richness. Because meaning isn't found in the hack, the app, or the 2-day shipping. It's found in the doing. So here's a question I'd love you to answer. What's one thing you used to do slowly that you now outsource? And what would happen if you took it back, even just for a day? Let me know in the comments below. I mean, I think it's important that everyone kind of has some sort of hobby. It's nice to have things that you do with your hands, like painting, drawing, just like some sort of almost like a vintage ritual, because it's nice. And honestly, I just like sometimes just stillness of peace and quiet, like just being kind of alone in my thoughts to like think of creative ideas. I find when there's like too much noise and stimulation, I can't like think properly. So for me, just like being alone and quiet really helps me kind of feel creative. Anyways, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. All right, take care.